You are not here by coincidence. Something deep within you led you to this moment, to these words, as if life itself had carefully placed them in your path. Healing rarely arrives as a dramatic revelation or a sudden flash of light. More often, it enters like a whisper carried into the middle of chaos, a murmur so faint you might mistake it for silence. But it is there, steady, waiting for you to listen. This whisper doesn't come from the world outside. It does not arrive because something in your surroundings has shifted, or because fate suddenly became generous. It emerges from the inside, from a quiet alignment that begins to take shape within your soul. Healing begins the moment you stop rejecting the parts of your story you once wanted to erase. It begins when you allow the shadows you once feared to step forward, when you no longer exile the versions of yourself that carried pain, anger, or shame. Carl Jung once said that we do not transform by flooding the darkness with light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is where integration begins, not in destroying the shadow, but in allowing it to be seen, named, and welcomed as part of the whole. The ancients knew this long before Jung gave it words. In Greek mystery rites, initiates would descend into dark underground chambers to confront their fears, believing that only by walking through shadow could they emerge reborn. Among the shamans of Siberia, illness was often seen as the soul's fragmentation, and healing was not the removal of suffering, but the gathering of all scattered pieces back into harmony. And perhaps you have felt it too in some small but unmistakable way. A subtle sign that your healing has already begun, though you might not have recognized it. It is not loud, it is not dramatic. But within the storm of your daily life, you've started to sense a quiet shift. One of the earliest signs is that you stop fighting with yourself. Not because you've declared victory or convinced yourself that everything is fine, but because something inside you grows softer. A gentleness appears, silent, patient, allowing you to witness your own thoughts without rushing to judge them. It is the first step in a deeper journey, a journey countless generations before us have walked in their own ways. The Stoic philosophers of Rome called this moment ataraxia, a tranquility that arises not from avoiding pain, but from no longer letting pain dominate the heart. The Buddhist texts speak of it as the still pond of the mind, where ripples may come but do not disturb the depths. And medieval Christian mystics described it as the quiet grace of the soul, an inner silence where God's presence could finally be heard. This whisper is universal. It belongs to no single tradition, no single age. It is the quiet voice that has guided humanity through plagues and wars, through exile and loss, through every age where chaos threatened to break the spirit. Always it repeats the same truth. Healing begins not with the banishment of pain, but with the acceptance of it. And so, here you are, listening to the whisper you once ignored. Perhaps not yet fully aware, but already changed. The story of your healing has already begun, not in a flash of light, but in the gathering of your scattered pieces, in the return to yourself. The war inside you, the endless arguments and harsh judgments, begins to fade. Not because every question has been answered or every wound has been mended, but because you are no longer swinging your sword against yourself. What once felt like a battlefield now feels more like a space where you can sit down, listen, and breathe. A subtle shift takes place. Your inner dialogue changes tone. You no longer punish yourself for feeling too much. You stop demanding perfection as the price for rest. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, your voice softens. You begin to speak to yourself with honesty, but also with kindness. That kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest rebellion against the walls you once built to keep yourself divided. This gentleness does not arrive in a single moment of revelation. It creeps in with every small decision you make in your own favor. When you choose not to condemn yourself for stumbling. When you allow yourself to rest even if your to-do list is unfinished. When you forgive yourself for not healing as quickly as you thought you should. These choices accumulate like drops of water, carving out a new riverbed within your soul. Ancient thinkers understood this paradox well, that true strength is not rigid, but yielding. Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching wrote that water is the softest of all things, yet it can overcome rock and stone. The Stoics, too, believed in the power of softness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that kindness, even toward oneself, is a form of inner justice. And in Buddhist practice, compassion toward the self is not selfishness, but the foundation for extending compassion to the world. This quiet softness becomes a strength more enduring than any armor. Real resilience does not mean you never break. It means you allow yourself to bend without shattering. It means you can feel deeply without drowning in the feeling. You begin to recognize that strength is not the absence of wounds, but the willingness to keep walking with them. The shift is not dramatic, yet it is profound. The constant pressure to fix yourself loosens its grip. You realize that even your anger can exist without consuming your essence, that you can tremble with fear and still step forward, that you can fail and yet not become a failure. In that moment of recognition, you stop trying to sculpt yourself into an image of perfection. Instead, you begin to inhabit yourself as you are, flawed, human, alive. Cultures across time have honored this acceptance as a kind of initiation. Among the Japanese, there is the art of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, not to hide the cracks, but to illuminate them. The object becomes more beautiful, more valuable, precisely because it has been broken. In the same way, your inner fractures become the lines where light can enter, where compassion fills the void left by old battles. And so the endless noise of self-judgment begins to fade, not into silence, but into something better, presence. A grounded, steady presence that does not need to prove itself, does not need to earn its worth, but simply exists, whole, imperfect, and deeply human. There comes a moment when you realize that acceptance is not the same as giving up. To accept is not to surrender to despair or to resign yourself to suffering. True acceptance is clarity, the understanding that every emotion, every wound, every memory you once wished away has always been part of the map of your soul. Anger no longer means you are broken. Fear no longer means you are weak. Failure no longer means you are worthless. They are not verdicts, they are directions. They are signposts pointing toward places within you that still long to be seen. When you let them exist, when you make room for them without judgment, something extraordinary happens. Your inner chaos begins to take form. The medieval alchemists described their craft as the transformation of lead into gold. On the surface, they were speaking of metals, but beneath the surface, their language was spiritual. Lead was the heavy, dark matter of the soul, pain, fear, despair. Gold was the radiant wholeness that emerges when those shadows are purified through fire. They understood what Carl Jung would later echo, that transformation does not come from destroying the darkness, but from entering it and discovering the light hidden inside. Think of it as a great tapestry. The dark threads, the moments of grief, shame, and regret, once seemed to ruin the pattern. But when you step back, you see they give depth, contrast, and meaning to the whole. Without them, the design would be flat, lifeless. In the same way, your wounds add texture to the fabric of your being. This is not easy work. Acceptance requires courage because it asks you to stand in the presence of what once hurt you without flinching. It asks you to embrace contradictions, that you can be both fragile and strong, both wounded and healing, both lost and found. But in this paradox lies a secret freedom. Cultures across the world have recognized this. The Norse sagas speak of heroes not as flawless warriors, but as mortals scarred by loss, whose greatness lay in their ability to continue despite it. In Native American traditions, the wounded healer was often the one chosen to guide others, for they had walked through pain themselves and carried wisdom born from scars. Even in modern psychology, we find echoes of this truth. Resilience is not the absence of trauma, but the ability to weave it into meaning. And so you begin to see that acceptance does not silence your pain, it gives it language. It does not erase your past, it integrates it. When you stop rejecting the parts of yourself you once despised, you begin to walk with a new coherence, as though the scattered fragments of your soul are finally learning how to move together. It is not resignation. It is not weakness. It is the beginning of true strength, the kind that grows roots not in denial, but in truth. As your journey deepens, the past no longer arrives like a storm. It does not crash over you with the same unbearable weight it once carried. The memories are still there, shadows of betrayal, grief, failure, or loneliness, but they no longer drag you under. They surface, and instead of collapsing beneath them, you simply breathe. You can see them for what they are, moments in time, pieces of a larger story, fragments that shaped you but no longer define you. Healing through integration does not mean forgetting. It does not mean painting your history with bright colors so that the darkness disappears. Instead, it means standing in front of your own story and realizing it has lost its power to wound you in the same way. What once felt like an ever-present threat now becomes a chapter that you can hold without fear. This shift is subtle but profound. You do not glorify the past, nor do you erase it. You acknowledge it. And acknowledgement is a sacred act. To remember without shattering, to revisit without drowning, is to reclaim ownership of your life. The moments that once haunted you now take their place as lessons, as markers of how far you have traveled. Humanity has long understood this process. In the tragedies of ancient Greece, audiences were invited to relive the worst moments of human suffering, not to be destroyed by them, but to experience catharsis, the cleansing that comes from facing pain together. Among indigenous peoples, oral traditions preserved even the darkest parts of collective history, not to keep wounds open, but to ensure that their wisdom endured. Even medieval monks, copying painful chronicles of war and plague, believed that writing them down gave future generations the power to understand, not to be enslaved by memory. And so it is with you. Your difficult moments cease to be punishments. They become teachers. They become folded into the fabric of your becoming, not erased, not glorified, simply accepted as part of the whole. When you revisit the past now, it is not to reopen wounds, it is to gather wisdom, to notice how you survived, to recognize the strength that bloomed quietly in places you once thought barren. You begin to see that your past selves, the broken one, the silent one, the angry one, were not mistakes. They were necessary chapters, guardians of your survival when you knew no other way. To live with the past in this way is to stand on sacred ground. It is to look back without being chained, to carry memory without being crushed by it. And from that place you move forward, not in denial of what came before, but in reverence for all it taught you. There is a quiet revolution that takes place when you begin to see your pain not as a curse, but as something sacred. The versions of you that stumbled, that lashed out, that hid in silence, once you may have despised them, buried them, or tried to erase them. But healing reveals a deeper truth. They were never mistakes. They were survival. They were the raw, imperfect attempts of a soul trying to protect itself in a world it did not yet know how to navigate. Every past self, even the one you judged most harshly, was an expression of your will to endure. They are not stains on your story. They are testaments to your persistence. And when you turn toward them with compassion, when you finally embrace them, rather than banish them, something sacred unfolds. You discover that what once felt like contradiction, your rage and your tenderness, your despair and your hope, can exist together without canceling each other out. Integration is not about polishing yourself into flawlessness. It is about reverence for every fragment of who you have been. Across history, many cultures have understood pain not as something to be avoided, but as a teacher. In the rites of passage among the Maasai, young initiates endured trials of pain not to glorify suffering, but to reveal the strength that already lived within them. The Lakota vision quests demanded days of fasting and solitude, believing that struggle opened the doorway to wisdom. Even in medieval Europe, pilgrims walked barefoot for miles across rough earth, convinced that the pain of the body was a path to the humility and insight of the spirit. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Trauma, though it leaves scars, can also awaken resilience. Researchers call it post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where suffering deepens empathy, sharpens perspective, and strengthens the will to live authentically. What breaks us also reshapes us if we allow it. To see your pain as sacred does not mean to glorify suffering, nor to seek it. It means to honor what it has made possible. The betrayals that once hollowed you out are also the soil in which your compassion grew. The loneliness that once seemed unbearable is also what gave you the capacity to stand with yourself in silence. The wounds that once made you hide are also the reason you can now recognize the hidden pain in others. In this way, pain becomes more than a burden. It becomes a lineage. Just as scarred warriors carried their marks with dignity, you too begin to carry your inner scars not as shame, but as symbols of survival. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin to whisper, "What did this teach me?" And when you do, the contradiction inside you dissolves. You are no longer split between what you wish to erase and what you wish to keep. You are whole, precisely because you have chosen to honor every part of your journey, even the parts carved by pain. There is a moment when the wound no longer bleeds. It doesn't vanish. It never truly vanishes, but it closes, leaving behind a scar. And scars, unlike wounds, do not ache with every breath. They do not demand constant attention. They remain, quiet but undeniable, as proof of both injury and endurance. You begin to notice that you are no longer speaking from the wound. You are speaking from the scar. The words carry memory, but no longer the rawness of pain. The wound once made you crumble at its touch. The scar allows you to trace its outline with steady hands. In that shift, your story ceases to be a tragedy. It becomes a journey. Forgiveness becomes possible here, not the shallow forgiveness that seeks to erase the past or excuse harm, but the kind that liberates you from being defined by it. Sometimes forgiveness is for others, but more often it is for yourself. For the times you abandoned your own heart, for the moments you stayed silent when you longed to speak, for the choices you made when fear disguised itself as love. You come to understand that you did the best you could with the awareness you had at that time. And in that understanding, you stop punishing yourself for not knowing then what you know now. Across history, scars have been revered as emblems of transformation. Roman soldiers returned from campaigns marked with wounds that proved their loyalty and strength. Samurai in Japan saw scars not as disfigurements, but as honorable signs of devotion to duty. In tribal societies, ritual scarification symbolized both endurance and belonging, turning pain into art carved on the skin. These traditions remind us that scars are not blemishes. They are testimony. Your own scars, emotional, invisible though they may be, are no less sacred. They reveal that you have lived, that you have fallen and risen, that you have risked your heart even when it broke. They carry wisdom, the knowledge that you can endure, that you can transform, that you can emerge whole even after being torn apart. From this place, you stop treating your past as a prison. Instead, it becomes your foundation. You carry it not as a weight, but as a root system anchoring you. The wound once whispered shame. The scar speaks of survival. The wound once silenced you. The scar allows you to tell your story with dignity. This transformation is quiet. It does not demand recognition, yet others feel it in your presence. There is something steadier in the way you move, something calmer in the way you speak. You no longer try to prove you are healed. You simply live from the wisdom your scars have granted you. And so, the wound that once defined you becomes the scar that refines you. Pain is not erased, but it is transfigured. It is no longer an open fire consuming you. It is the glowing ember that warms and lights your path forward. When the fragments of your inner world begin to return to one another, something changes in the way you move through life. You stop reacting to everything as though the world were attacking you. Instead, you begin to respond with clarity, with steadiness, with intention. This is what it means to act from your center. The storms still come, but they no longer unmoor you. The criticisms, the disappointments, the unexpected turns, they arrive, but they do not scatter you into pieces the way they once did. Instead of flinching at every gust of wind, you hold steady, rooted like a tree whose branches sway, but whose trunk does not break. Your words change. They become more deliberate, less frantic. Your actions no longer spring from fear or the desperate need to defend yourself. They flow from a unified place within you, where mind, body, and soul are no longer at war. And in this quiet coherence, you discover a strength that feels nothing like the hardness you once mistook for power. Eastern traditions have long spoken of this state. In Taoism, it is called Wu Wei, effortless action that arises naturally when one is aligned with the Tao. In Zen, it is the equanimity of sitting at the center of the circle while chaos spins outside. Even the Bhagavad Gita speaks of the Sthita Prajna, the one whose wisdom is steady, whose mind is unmoved by pleasure or pain. Across cultures, the message is the same. True strength is not loud, it is centered. And this inner centering changes everything. You stop rushing to prove yourself right. Peace becomes more important than winning an argument. You no longer dive into conflict just to protect your ego, because you finally understand there is nothing in you that needs defending. Wholeness cannot be threatened. This presence is not performative. It cannot be faked. It does not mean you never tremble or never feel fear. It means you are no longer ruled by those tremors. You can cry and still remain steady. You can feel anger and still choose patience. You can doubt and still take the next step. History has shown us the power of such presence. Gandhi's quiet resistance shook an empire not through violence, but through centered conviction. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius led Rome through plague and war, not by frantic decree, but by a steadiness born of inner discipline. Even in more ordinary lives, countless unnamed figures have endured hardship with a calm that radiated more power than force ever could. You too carry this possibility. Your presence, once fractured by inner wars, begins to hold coherence. Others sense it even if they cannot name it. They notice the calm in your voice, the steadiness in your gaze, the way you no longer collapse under pressure. You do not dominate the room, you anchor it. Acting from your center does not mean perfection. It means alignment. It means you are no longer betraying yourself in every choice. You have become the sanctuary you once sought outside. And from that sanctuary you move through the world, not untouched by it, but no longer at its mercy. As you grow more whole within yourself, the way you connect with others begins to change. What once came from emptiness now comes from fullness. You no longer chase relationships to fill a void or to silence loneliness. Instead, you begin to choose from awareness, from resonance. The bonds you form are no longer desperate attempts to be completed. They are extensions of the wholeness you already carry. You stop attracting the same old wounds disguised in new faces because you no longer need someone else to play out the parts of yourself you once refused to face. Now you recognize your projections when they arise. You no longer run from them or shame yourself for them. You simply acknowledge them and, in doing so, free yourself. This changes everything. You are no longer satisfied with half-hearted connections. Not out of arrogance, but because your soul can no longer tolerate masks. You crave honesty. You seek presence. You yearn for bonds that breathe authenticity. even if they are not always easy, even if they sometimes hurt. Because you have learned that discomfort born from truth is sacred, while comfort born from pretense is fragile and false. History reminds us of this timeless desire for authentic connection. In tribal communities, kinship was not just about blood, it was about shared truth, mutual responsibility, and presence. In the monastic brotherhoods of medieval Europe, bonds were forged not in convenience, but in shared vows of authenticity and discipline. Even in philosophy, Aristotle spoke of philia, the deep friendship that arises not from utility or pleasure, but from virtue, from the meeting of souls committed to truth. Your communication begins to reflect this transformation. You no longer feel the need to explain every emotion or justify your existence. You speak less, but what you say carries weight. You can set boundaries without cruelty. You can walk away without resentment. You no longer cling to relationships that fragment you, nor remain in spaces where you must abandon yourself to belong, and so your relationships become mirrors of your healing. What is not mutual begins to dissolve naturally, without force. You stop feeding dynamics that thrive on drama or imbalance because your energy no longer supports them. Instead, you draw near to those who honor your truth just as you honor theirs. Love, too, takes on a different shape. It ceases to be a bargain for safety or validation. It becomes shared freedom. You do not need someone to rescue you, nor do you wish to rescue them. You meet as equals, carrying your wholeness, offering it not from lack, but from abundance. Even in endings you find dignity. Goodbyes no longer destroy you, for you understand that what is meant to stay will stay, and what leaves was never yours to hold. This shift does not make you colder. It makes you more real, more grounded, more capable of loving without losing yourself. Because when you no longer abandon yourself, you no longer allow others to abandon you. And in that, every bond you keep becomes sacred, not because it lasts forever, but because it is true in the moment it exists. That truth elevates love beyond possession. It makes friendship deeper than convenience. It makes connection an act of reverence rather than need. There comes a moment when peace arrives without warning, not as a reward, not as the result of everything finally falling into place, but as something that simply appears, soft, unannounced, like a breath that slows on its own. You may be sitting in silence or moving through an ordinary day when you realize the weight you once carried no longer feels the same. It has not disappeared, but it no longer drags you under. This peace is not euphoria. It is quieter, steadier, more profound. It does not depend on perfect circumstances. It does not demand that every wound be healed or every question answered. It arises from within, from the place where all your fragments have been gathered and accepted. It is not the absence of pain, but the presence of wholeness. Mystics and sages across time have spoken of this state. The Sufis called it sakina, a tranquility that descends upon the heart when it surrenders to truth. In Taoist writings, it is the effortless calm of aligning with the flow of the way. Christian mystics described it as the peace that surpasses understanding, not logical, but undeniable. And in Buddhism, it is the serenity of nirvana, not escape from life, but full presence within it. You begin to notice this peace in small, almost invisible ways. Your breathing deepens without effort. Sleep becomes more restful, not because life is easy, but because you no longer abandon yourself to survive. Pain still visits, but it speaks a different language now. It informs rather than overwhelms. It moves with you, not against you. The urgency that once ruled your days loosens its grip. You stop reacting to every spark as if it were a fire. You no longer measure your worth by productivity, applause, or validation. The noise of the world still hums around you, but it no longer dictates your rhythm. Your balance comes from within, and because it is not built on fragile conditions, it endures even when life shifts. History, too, tells us that peace is not passivity. The great leaders who carried it, Figures like Nelson Mandela, who emerged from decades of imprisonment with calm steadiness, show us that peace is not naivety. It is power. It is presence. It is the refusal to let external chaos decide the state of your soul. And so you begin to walk differently. People notice, even if they cannot explain why. There is something quieter in you, but also stronger. You no longer need to announce your healing because it radiates through your presence. Peace has become your frequency, your signature. It is not the end of the path. It is the new way you walk it. To heal is not to erase who you once were. It is to gather every version of yourself, the frightened child, the angry survivor, the silent protector, and welcome them home. Integration is the sacred act of saying to each part of you, you belong, you are not forgotten, you are not a mistake, you are me. In that homecoming, you begin to understand that wholeness was never about perfection. It was always about belonging. Belonging first to yourself. No longer fragmenting who you are to be accepted by others. No longer abandoning pieces of yourself just to fit into the world. You belong to yourself now, and from that belonging, every other connection becomes clearer, freer, more honest. Your past, once carried like chains, becomes a root system. It does not hold you back. It anchors you. Your scars are no longer silent weights. They are threads in the tapestry of your being. And the tapestry is beautiful, not despite the darker threads, but because of them. This truth has echoed across civilizations. In African philosophy, there is Ubuntu. I am because we are. A reminder that integration within oneself naturally extends to integration with others. In Japanese aesthetics, there is wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the grace of things weathered by time. And in indigenous wisdom, healing is never only individual, but always communal. When one person finds wholeness, the circle itself grows stronger, and so it is with you. Your integration is not just for you, it ripples outward. Your presence, once fractured, now emanates coherence. Others feel safer in your company, not because you save them, but because you do not abandon yourself. You become a reminder that healing is possible, that brokenness is not the end of the story. That belonging begins within. In this way, your journey is no longer just about surviving. It is about expanding. Your story ceases to be a closed wound and becomes an open bridge, connecting past and future, self and other, shadow and light. You no longer need to hide, to explain, to perform. You are whole. And wholeness does not shout. It simply exists, radiant, steady, undeniable. This is the gift of integration. Not a perfect life, but a life lived authentically. Not a soul without scars, but a soul that honors every scar as part of its sacred design. And in that authenticity, you finally find what you were seeking all along. Not escape from your story, but belonging to it. And perhaps, without even knowing it, you have already begun. The whisper that called you here, the softness that entered quietly, the scars you now trace without shame, they were the signs, the beginning of your return. You are not broken. You are gathering. You are becoming whole. Your story is not a prison. It is your home. And in belonging to it fully, you belong to yourself at last.